Hi and welcome. Happy Sunday. I'm Coach Morgan. I'm here with your weekly nutrition lesson, which this week is going to be all about alcohol. So, what's the deal with alcohol? Is it an absolute no-no for athletes? Does it affect performance, fat burning, muscle building? We're going to break it all down from start to finish so that you can feel confident about your approach to drinking, if you do drink, which I assume you do if you're still watching. So the disclaimer for this week is that this lesson is appropriate for all backgrounds and all goals. First, we're going to talk about what alcohol is exactly. Most people aren't aware that it is, in and of itself, a macronutrient. So macronutrients are just nutrients that we need in large quantities. They give the body energy. The other macronutrients are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So alcohol is like the fourth stepsister. We don't need it like the others. All four contain energy and calories, and just like carbs, fats, and proteins, it's important to understand what alcohol contains and how the body processes it in order to determine if and how we consume it. So protein and carbs both contain 4 calories per gram. About fat contains about 9 calories per gram, and then alcohol contains about 7 calories per gram, so right in the middle. Another unknown, less known fact about alcohol is that it's a known toxin. The other macronutrients are not, contrary to popular belief. People like to say that about carbs, but we know better, right? So with alcohol, as soon as our body ingests it, our body automatically goes into overdrive, especially our livers. It's primarily concerned with removing the alcohol or the toxin from the body as fast as possible. It does so by prioritizing ethanol or alcohol metabolism in favor of glucose metabolism or fat metabolism. So we're going to kind of dive into this a little bit more. There was a study that was done that's a perfect example of this. Subjects were given 2 alcoholic beverages and they were monitored for 4 hours after the fact. And they found in this study that total body fat oxidation decreased by 79%. 79%. So instead of utilizing fat or glucose for energy, the body prioritized ethanol or alcohol as its primary source of fuel in order to metabolize it out of the body because it is a toxin. They also found that while ingesting the alcohol, so kind of like happy hour, that reduced fat oxidation rates to 0%. So that's just an interesting fact. So because weight gain and reduction are both dependent on the use, storage, and oxidation or breakdown of carbs, fats, and proteins, that's something that you want to think about when you are drinking alcohol. Another lesser known fact about alcohol consumption is that it affects muscle protein synthesis. So earlier this week, I put up a box, an Ask Me Anything box on Instagram and asked you all what questions you had about alcohol as I was preparing this lesson. And I was pretty impressed because many of you knew that it affects or influences muscle protein synthesis because you knew to ask for it. So tell me you're an athlete without telling me you're an athlete. Alcohol decreases MPS. So muscle protein synthesis, that's the mechanism that's responsible for muscle growth, right? So when we train, we are breaking down and creating damage in our muscle tissue, and then the actual muscle building happens in the recovery process as we are sleeping and giving our body the nutrition it needs to build up that and repair that muscle tissue. So in turn, drinking can inhibit the recovery of muscle tissue after training. It's also interesting to know that there's a study done on rats, which most studies start there, and it showed that chronic ingestion of alcohol decreased muscle fiber size. So the key word here is chronic. The decrease was improved or kind of evened out when the rats exercised. So instead of experiencing positive adaptation from that exercise, so getting stronger or faster, whatever the adaptation is, the rats just kind of stayed the same. It evened out. So there's a 24 to about 37% reduction in MPS that was noted. That range is because it's dependent on a few variables like whether or not food was ingested. So this is like across the board in the studies that are out there. So that's just kind of an example of how alcohol can affect the recovery process. We work really hard in the gym and we want to make sure that we are benefiting from all of that hard work via sleep, nutrition, recovery, but especially like if we're drinking and it's just kind of evening it out. If you are a chronic drinker, that's something to consider. Alcohol ingestion also affects hormones and the endocrine system. So it's important to note that while I'm talking about all of these studies and alcohol and how it influences the body and how it influences our training and body composition, etc., that there's a big difference between the research that shows moderate drinking, which is defined by about 2 drinks a day for men and 1 drink a day for women, and heavy drinking. And they split it up by men and women, but you also need to keep in mind that men and women come in different shapes and sizes, so this is like a generalization. For moderate drinking, hormones stay pretty neutral for men, so that was 2 drinks a day. For women, it can result in increased testosterone and estrogen and decreased progesterone. Again, that was 1 drink a day for women. Our endocrine systems are just more complex and more sensitive than men, so that makes sense. And something that you need to keep in mind, right? For heavy drinking, that was defined by 4 drinks in any given sitting or 15 drinks per week for men. That resulted in an increase in cortisol, a decrease in testosterone, a decrease in progesterone, as well as a decrease in T4 and T3, which are thyroid hormones, which are important for basic physiology, but also body composition as well. And then for heavy drinking for women, it was defined as 3 or more drinks in any given sitting, or 8 drinks per week for women in total. So that resulted in an increase in cortisol, testosterone, and estrogen, and then progesterone and T4 and T3 decreased. So it's also important to note that this was when all other factors remain the same. So energy balance remained the same, training remained the same, that sort of a thing. So even when the effects of alcohol were mitigated. How does it affect performance, given all of this? So one of the more acute ways that it can negatively impact performance is via hydration. Alcohol is a diuretic, so it pulls fluids from the body. And so performance can be affected by dehydration as little as 3 to 4% of dehydration. And some other acute effects that result in alcohol intake, so short term, would be delayed fat metabolism, which we talked about, as well as potentially just an increase in caloric intake if you are not changing your intake to account for your alcohol consumption. Some chronic effects from consistent and chronic use of alcohol would be hormone balance and muscle fiber size, like I just discussed. And it's also important to note that you're not just gonna drink a beer and then all of a sudden decrease your testosterone. It doesn't work like that. This is from repetition. You wanna consider the frequency and quantity at which you are drinking. Sleep can also be negatively impacted by alcohol consumption if you drink. You know this, depending on how much you drink and how frequently you drink. It can decrease sleep quantity and quality, and so you also want to take into account, because sleep is such a paramount recovery factor, that if it is negatively impacted, you're going to kind of compound the effects of inadequate sleep with the alcohol consumption. All right. So, with all this being said, like I said, it's nuanced, it needs context. I'm constantly talking about context. Just because something isn't ideal doesn't mean that you have to avoid it entirely. For me, I live in Southern California, we live in the Temecula Valley right now, which is like wine country. Lots of wineries in town. It's very much a part of the culture here. So people, when they go out, they generally go to the wineries. So it is a part of the culture, social experience. Some people just like genuinely enjoy how it tastes. Maybe you're in the industry. So it's important to put context to all of these studies because we're human and they're only so good in like everyday life, right? How they're applied. So an example of this would be like, how often are you drinking? If you're drinking 1 to 3 drinks about 1 time a week, that's only a few hours that your body is prioritizing ethanol metabolism over fat and glucose metabolism. Is it that big of a deal? Likely no, right? If you're drinking nightly, you're spreading that effect across the board throughout the week. So again, you need context. What are your goals? Is it negatively impacting your choices? Are you seeing results that you want to see? Alcohol would be the first variable, one of the first variables that I would look at if you weren't seeing the results that you wanted to see. Another way to put context to this all is considering if you are factoring it into your daily intake. So you don't have to be a macro tracker to do this. You don't need like precision in order to make this happen. Just like, are you considering the calories that are in the alcoholic beverages that you are drinking? Is it pushing you into a caloric surplus? Is it affecting your protein intake? So for instance, what I see often for my clients who are newer and who drink are they'll go out maybe to like a happy hour or to an event or a party or something like that, and then they won't eat the meal that they originally were going to eat in order to compensate for the calories in the alcoholic beverages that they're drinking. And so not only their energy balance might be the same because they've taken that into account, but they're missing out on all of the nutrients that were in that meal that they completely removed from their day, especially protein, right? So that's something to consider. Are you mitigating the effects of the alcohol as best as possible? Are you just like, whatever, I'm drinking, I don't really care? Or are you drinking water while you drink? Are you getting in the vitamins and nutrients that you need throughout the rest of your intake? Is it affecting your satiety? This is a huge one. Another really important factor that you want to consider when you and if you are drinking. Alcohol, it has energy, but it's pretty much, I hate this term, but like empty calories. They don't do much for you. They're not keeping you full. They're not giving you what your body needs. They have calories and alcohol in them. So what tends to happen is people will skip their meals in order to account for the calories in the drinks that they are having. And so then they become extra hungry because they didn't eat balanced meals that keep them satiated or satiety high. And so sometimes it's just like a snowball that keeps forming, right? They drink and then they become hungry and maybe they'll eat more than their energy requirements are. They'll choose atypical meals that don't make them feel their best. Maybe they don't overeat and they skip that meal, eat or drink the alcohol that they wanted, and then that hunger builds over time. And so maybe they're hitting their macro goals in order to achieve whatever their goal is, but it doesn't feel good. Like it doesn't feel the way that it should because a lot of the calories that they are consuming are empty. They're just not keeping them full and satiated. So again, another point to consider when you are drinking. Does it affect how you feel? Are you skipping your training sessions? Or is it affecting your performance and recovery? Is it affecting your choices? Like I said, that impulsivity factor really ramps up when we are drinking because you're out, inhibitions are just kind of lower. You're like, sure, those fries sound good, or sure, let's go pick up something on the way home. Again, those aren't bad choices, but if they are happening frequently enough to create a pattern, it can influence your overall performance and whatever goals that you are looking to achieve. like I said, context is important. You want to kind of zoom out and look at the whole picture. So alcohol might make it more difficult to achieve those goals. Like, it's not going to make it easier. It's the main thing to remember. So if you are struggling, that's one of the first things that you want to look at and consider. If you're having a difficult time maintaining a deficit over time, probably want to look at your alcohol intake. If you're having a difficult time staying consistent in the gym, maybe your training days are, especially on the weekends, because your weekday is really busy with work and whatever else you have going on, your responsibilities, and so you build your training week around the weekends, but then you're drinking on the weekends. Is that kind of influencing how you're going to achieve your goals or work towards your goals? Just things to consider. Like I said, I do find that I work with all different people, all different backgrounds, all different goals. The clients that I have that do drink on a consistent basis have more hoops that they have to jump through. So if you struggle with that, it's a hoop that you can remove and not have to worry about navigating if you do not drink or choose to not drink. If you do choose to drink and you're like, I got this, I just need some tips to help navigate it better, I have a few tips for you. The main thing to remember is that if you are a person who tracks your macros, you can track your alcohol intake in whatever app you use. So like I use Chronometer, maybe you use MyFitnessPal. You can track your alcoholic beverages, and this can increase awareness around how your alcohol intake is influencing your greater goals and your intake. So you have to swap it for either fats or carbohydrates. I generally recommend either a combination of both or carbohydrates. We eat more carbohydrates as athletes. Again, general statement, but we tend to. And fat also just has a higher satiation factor to it. So you want to really make the most of the macros that you are eating when you are drinking. And if fat is going to keep you fuller for longer, that's the better bet, right? So just as a little recap there, because I kind of got off course, you want to track your alcohol intake because it won't allow you to track it as alcohol, as that being the macronutrient. You have to track it as either fat, carbohydrates, or a combination of both. Some of the drinks you can just kind of, I think there's like a tractor going by, I'm sorry. You can either scan it or look it up. Whenever you do though, you want to make sure that you look at the log in the app and see if that item is listed as carbs, fats, or a combination of both, because this will allow you to kind of back plan it. Speaking of which, we kind of want to, I use this term if-then planning. So if I want to consume 2 drinks tonight, then I need to look at what those drinks are, what the macronutrients would be, and then back plan from there to account for it in my intake earlier on in the day so that I am maintaining or whatever my goal is. So you can kind of like do the math to pre-plan your day around those drinks. If you know that you're logging it as carbohydrates, then maybe you can back plan your meal choices and your food choices that way. You want to be drinking water while you're drinking. I always tell people to drink a full glass of water in between drinks, but just having a glass of water next to you is good practice. Beer tends to be carb heavier than other options. Lighter wines, so in color like whiter wines, tend to be lower calorie. You can also opt for like sugar-free or low-calorie mixers to help decrease calories, to save for more nutrient-dense filling foods in your intake. But with all of this being said, okay, this is something that's incredibly important to me, so I want it to be as clear as possible. Even though something is more ideal, doesn't mean that it's the right choice for you. So you want to zoom out and consider your whole intake and the whole picture. Order what you want. like order something that satisfies you and then back plan from there. So if you really, really enjoy a certain drink, just plan to order that drink, because nothing is worse than trying to fill it with something that just doesn't satisfy you, like a vodka soda or something like that, and you're like, I don't even really like this, I'm just using it for the effects of the alcohol, and then it's just kind of like, you want to make the most of the experience, okay? That's what I generally recommend. So even though it's not quote unquote macro friendly, if it's going to make you happier, you need to consider that in your decision making process. If you find yourself decompressing with alcohol on a consistent basis and it is the only decompression strategy that you have in your toolbox, that is when you need to kind of consider your relationship with alcohol and work in more strategies to decompress. I see this often, especially nowadays, like with the pandemic, people just use it to decompress on a daily basis, and it's not mindfully drinking. So, and it can only result in so much decompression. It's not long-term decompression. Things like low intensity exercise outside, meditation, just doing like a hobby that you enjoy, spending time with someone who fills your cup. Those sorts of things are going to help you out more than alcohol ingestion. It's just like a physical decompression versus a psychological one, and you need it both in order to accomplish the decompression that's going to last and be advantageous for you in the long haul. So again, just to recap that little chapter, context is important, and you want to consider the full picture while you are deciding how much to drink, what to drink, whether or not drinking is the right choice for you. It's not just about macronutrients or energy balance. You want to consider everything, the whole picture. A little fun fact for you: whiskey, cognac, and tequila all have higher amounts. I'm not really sure how to pronounce this. It's congeners. They're a toxic byproduct of alcohol that is responsible for more intense and frequent hangovers. So the general rule of thumb is that the clearer the beverage, the better for the hangover. So it depends on what type of alcohol you are also ingesting, as well as all the other factors that I talked about. Takeaways. So with the right planning and awareness and approach, you can really achieve your goals and also enjoy alcohol. You can also like kind of change your schedule around and plan a rest day after you drink so performance isn't negatively impacted, or just look at your training schedule for the week and plan it around there. For most folks, it's more of a matter of empowerment. Oftentimes when we are talking about things that aren't, they kind of get a bad rap, right? Like that polarization, this is bad, this is good. Like alcohol and sugar generally are considered bad. Once you know more about them, you can empower yourself in your choices. And so if you are drinking like a drink a night, or if you are drinking 1 to 3 beverages on a weekly basis, or even less than that, is it going to have like a long-term consequence? Likely no. Like unless it's completely throwing you off your route, and you are waking up with huge hangovers and making really impulsive decisions and stuff when you are drinking, it's really not something to like sweat. If you are focusing on a more specific goal like fat loss, and you are towards the tail end of that goal, and so you are eating less macros and really need to make the most of the food that you're eating, then that is when you might want to consider temporarily refraining from alcohol in order to get what you need and achieve your goal in the short term, and then kind of ramp it up after that. If you are drinking more heavily than what I just described, then that is when I would suggest kind of considering the greater picture and how it's impacting you and how you're feeling and that sort of a thing. For me personally, I don't drink, but it's not like I completely don't drink. I don't know. That's how I describe it, is I just choose not to drink. I haven't had a drink in like 3 years, and before that I had maybe one drink in a span of like 2 years. That's how frequently I quote unquote drink. Alcoholism runs in my family, so I just choose to not drink, and for me, the impact just isn't worth it. So if you're one of those people, I tend to drink for social situations. I was nervous that people would look at me like I maybe wasn't fun, or I was like high strung or something, and if I had a drink in my hand, then they wouldn't consider that. But the older I got, the more I realized, like, I don't want to be around people like that anyways, you know? And I could have fun and not drink and be around people who are drinking and have it not be a thing. It's totally possible, but I don't want to be around people who are like pressuring me to drink because they're like, well, you're no fun. Like, that's not cool either, you know? So it kind of brought clarity to how I engaged in social situations. And I'm always open to discussing that. If you're like, man, that's me, and I need to kind of reach out and talk through that, I'm more than happy to talk with you about it, because I don't think it's commonly talked about. But even with that being said, even though I choose not to, it doesn't mean that you can't drink alcohol and not achieve your goal and achieve your goals. You can definitely do it with the right planning and just being mindful of how it is impacting you. And this stuff changes over time, right? So maybe during the holiday season you're drinking more, and you're like, yeah, that I definitely didn't feel good. Just take note of how it made you feel and what you could have done differently, and then you can kind of roll that into the next holiday season, make some adjustments, see if that helps. Same thing with summer. Summer tends to be a season of more alcohol intake, social alcohol intake, and so same rule applies. The more you reflect on how a variable is influencing how you feel and how you are achieving your goals, the better, because this is all trial and error. I always tell people, you are your own science experiment. So change one thing, change it a small step, and then see the impact that it made. Was it in your favor? Was it not? How did it work out? Can you make any changes? And then kind of go from there. Just make that small change, and then see how it makes you feel, see the impact it has, and continue that process. There's no way, like, you can listen to all these lessons and you can do all the research and you can ask all the questions, but it all boils down to making those small choices, seeing how they make you feel, and then making adjustments from there. All about reflection. So that is today's lesson on alcohol intake. I'm sorry it got interrupted earlier. Facebook just kicked me out like 10 minutes into the lesson, so it got chopped. But I'm going to post this link so you have the full lesson available to you. If you have any questions about anything that was covered in this lesson, feel free to just drop them in the comments section below, and I am more than happy to answer them. If you want a more anonymous option, you can always reach out to me and DM me on Instagram. My IG handle is I am the Rebel, REBELLE. And if you have any topics that you want to see covered in the future, please reach out to me. I'm always open to recommendations. This lesson itself was a recommendation, so I want to hear what you want to hear, and I will go from there. I really enjoyed this lesson. It was fun to kind of dive into, because I know it is like I said, a topic that people just don't feel confident about because they don't understand how it affects the body. But the more you understand the science behind things, the more empowered you can feel in your decisions. All right, that's today's lesson. See you next week.